Shalom from the Holy Land of Israel. This video refutes some of Dr. Golan Broshi's false claims made in the first two podcasts of the One for Israel series of the 7 reformations of Rabbinic Judaism, in particular focused on the supposed invention of conversion. All clips from these podcasts are included here under fair use. The original videos being disputed are given in links below. Dr. Golan Broshi is an author of the book Rabbinic Judaism Debunked. This is what he has to say in the first podcast entitled The Messianic Roots of the Rabbinic Faith.
When the second temple was destroyed, you can say biblical Judaism, the old Torah Judaism, the Torah the Judaism that was based on the temple was destroyed. Right. 70 AD was destroyed. The old covenant was gone, and there had to be a new covenant. There had to be a new Judaism that would rise on the ashes of the destruction of the second temple. And on that there were two streams, two cults or two sects in Judaism: Messianic Judaism and Rabbinic Judaism. Each offered a new covenant. The believers the followers of Yeshua, of Jesus, followed the new covenant with his blood. The rabbis, the rabbinic side, follow a new covenant that they cut with the oral law. I call it the new covenant of the oral law.
By Messianic Judaism, of course, Dr. Broshi means early Christianity. His whole premise with regard to Orthodox Judaism is simply not true. On the contrary, it's all to do with the eternal covenant made by God with the Jewish people at Sinai some 3,500 years ago. It's still what Christians would call the Old Covenant. The first 5 and most ancient books of the Tanakh, attributed to Moses himself, the Torah giving all of God's commandments to the Jewish people, are divided into sections or parshas, which Jews study every week in the original Hebrew, complete with detailed commentaries. The oral law was always necessary to understand the details of God's commandments. For instance, Jews are told in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 8 to 9, part of the Shema, which religious Jews recite every day, to bind the commandments of God as a sign upon our arms, and to be ornaments between our eyes, and to write them on the doorposts of our house and on our gates. What does this all actually mean? We need the oral law to tell us that this means tefillin and mezuzahs and how to fix them appropriately. Indeed, tefillin have been discovered at Qumran, over 2,000 years old, which are just like tefillin used today. And measurements taken of ancient mikvahs, that's ritual baths in which Jews purify themselves, show them to follow the same requirements recorded in the oral law as are used for mikvahs today. Finally, the oral law was written down and redacted by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who lived in Judea in the 2nd century CE, because Jews who were still living in their homeland then were coming under great pressure from the Romans not to learn Torah, and it was feared that the oral law would otherwise be lost. Subsequently, many arguments by the brightest and best Torah scholars over many generations about the precise meaning and understanding of the most minuscule details of the oral law that could possibly be conceived, various moral stories and other information, were redacted into the Talmud. Firstly, one in Israel in the 4th century, but the most authoritative one was not completed until around 500 in modern-day Iraq. It is huge, with many volumes, many arguments, and it requires much in-depth study with a partner. But everything ultimately goes back to the written Torah and all the commandments given in it by God. And the authority of rabbis to interpret Jewish law is given clearly in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 to 11. It says, if a matter of judgment is hidden from you, you shall come to the Kohanim, the Levites, and to the judge who will be in those days. You shall do according to the word that they will tell you. Such is the disdain that Dr. Broshi has for authentic Judaism that he calls it the rabbinic cult and Orthodox Jews holders of satanic deceptions. In the second podcast, Turning Ethnic Jewishness into Religion, Dr. Broshi argues that before the destruction of the Second Temple, Judaism was all to do with ethnicity. If you were a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you were Jewish.
This revolution of making Judaism be a theological more than ethnic thing made it possible for Gentiles to study Rabbinic Judaism, and after they study Rabbinic Judaism for 1 year, they all of a sudden become Jewish. You know how it's called? It's called Giyur. It's called conversion. The rabbinic invention of conversion.
This is nonsense. There have always been converts into the Jewish people and the commandments God gave us in the Torah. One of the most frequently repeated commandments in the Torah is to love the convert. For instance, in Leviticus chapter 9, verses 33 to 34, we're told, when a proselyte, that's a convert, dwells among you in your land, do not taunt him. The proselyte who dwells with you shall be like a native among you, and you shall love him like yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am Hashem, your God. And the story of Ruth in the Tanakh is considered the archetypal conversion story. Ruth was a Moabite woman who married a Jewish man who died. But she refused to leave her mother-in-law, and she returned with her to Israel, where she married Boaz and became an ancestor of King David himself, and thereby the future Mashiach. And Ruth lived over 1,000 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. Later in this second podcast, Dr. Broshi claims that rabbis are missionaries of the rabbinic faith.
So we have one party, Messianic Jews, that says, no, you Gentiles, you don't need to become Jews in order to share our faith. And we have the other party, the rabbinic sect, the rabbinic cult, that says, if Gentiles wants to share our faith, they have to become Jewish. But how do you make a Gentile Jewish? The conversion, now scholars are talking about the rabbis as missionaries, the missionaries of the rabbinic faith. Now, there's the rabbinic sect did mission stuff, conversion stuff towards Jews, to convert Jews into their sect, and the rabbinic and the rabbis did also mission trips to Gentiles to convert them, and so when they witnessed to Jews to come into their sect, they didn't have to convert them. When they witnessed to Gentiles, they said you have to go through conversion. So they call us missionaries, but the rabbis are the biggest missionaries in the world.
If you have ever tried to convert into Orthodox Judaism, you will have found that statement to be a complete lie. The opposite is the case. You literally have to fight your way in, and you have to be extremely determined to become a Jew. And it usually takes years. Why? Because there is a real spiritual change at the moment of conversion, and rabbis recognize this. Once you are committed to God's commandments to the Jewish people in the Torah, there is no going back. You are far better off spiritually as a good Gentile, keeping the 7 Noahide laws, than as a backsliding Jew who no longer keeps the mitzvot. And if you've not heard of the Noahide laws, then I'm going to give a link below showing you some information about them. They are the commandments for non-Jews. In the first podcast, we are told the following.
You want to become religious. I don't know, you heard from God. What you need to do, what people think they need to do, is go to a rabbi, and he will teach them how to worship God.
This is the conversion process.
Yeah, and it's nothing to do with a supernatural spirit, with being born again. Nothing to do with faith. You got to put faith in something, but it's not in God. It's in men.
That is completely false. And I speak as someone who was a Christian for a number of years before converting to Judaism, like quite a large number of other people finding that they have a Jewish spark within these days, which once lit leads to the overwhelming need to convert to Judaism. Personally, I literally went through hell for months of agonized waiting. Spiritually, it felt like God was heating everything up, like refining silver, as he tells us in the Tanakh, allowing all the dross to come out of my previous religious understanding. Before I was finally truly ready to come home as the Jew I had found, with God's help, that I needed to be. Eventually, I had nothing left to fight anymore. And I literally stood at the kotel on Yom Kippur and begged Hashem either to take away what he had put in my heart and soul or to let me in. Only then was the way cleared for me to proceed. And when I finally got to the mikveh in front of 3 Shomer Shabbat Jewish men, all rabbis, as required by Jewish law, I really did receive a new soul. I remember it happening all of a sudden. And then there was a real difference. It was like I was taking off. At long last, my agonized wait was over and I was home. And my Jewish soul came from the only place where souls come from, directly from God himself. I was now irrevocably a Jew. And by the way, I was already a physical descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, directly down on my father's side. According to Dr Broshi, did that make me Jewish already? Well, no, not according to God. And Ezra, who lived in about the 5th century BCE, commanded Jewish men who had taken non-Jewish wives to send them away along with their children. If these children had been considered Jewish, he would never have told them to do this. Jewishness is ultimately to do with the soul, received when in the womb thanks to a Jewish mother or at the moment of conversion in a mikveh. Jews actually have a higher soul than do non-Jews, which is why we have more responsibilities to keep than non-Jews in the 613 commandments that God gave us in the Torah. We have a relationship as Jews directly with God himself, who has promised us that he will always keep his part of the covenant he made with our ancestors at Sinai. Hashem lovingly tells us that the pattern of life that he gave us to keep as Jews is not distant. Rather, the matter is very near to you, in your mouth and your heart to perform it. See Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 11 to 14. Judaism in Israel can be deeply fulfilling, vibrant, and inspiring. It is our true path as Jews and where our real relationship directly with God himself actually lies. If you're Jewish, don't be misled by false claims from Christians like Dr Broshi. He hasn't got his facts right at all.